As appropriate, you have to use a combination of advertising, public relations, community relations, consumer education, branding, government reputation, and government regulations. Communicating all those actions will strengthen your reputation and build your trust reserve. Today, I've had several people say to me, what is the state of the market in India with respect to understanding what public relations is? How much do people truly understand that public relations has actually moved on from getting a few column inches in a story in a particular publication to understanding that with 45,000 publications in India, the need to recognize which publication you're going to be in and what you're going to be saying in that publication is more important than those few column inches. It's easy to come up with a reputation management program. Then you have to monitor public perception. Just as a company constantly monitors competitive activities, it amazes me how few companies actually measure their own reputation and then adjust their own actions and messages. That's what marketing is all about. It's about understanding what other people think about you and then supplying information so that they think the way you would like them to think. Companies are like political figures. You need to constantly provide information to constituents who are always judging you. Now, in the end, reputation management is one of those things that's always a journey, never a destination. Companies' desired reputations can only be achieved and maintained if they evolve in response to the changing business environment. From my perspective, the environment is changing rapidly. I'll conclude by saying that while I do not understand India, I do understand enough of the business world to know that every day it is going to be increasingly changing. And that we as a group of communication professionals have a role in helping consumers and other constituents understand what those changes are going to mean. To a small degree, I hope that as we basically come closer as two nations, and as India begins to export multinationals, that it will recognize the issues that companies today will have to face, and that India will be in the forefront of the marketing field with making sure that Indian companies in particular understand what trust, reputation, and brand management is all about. Companies today face challenges in their markets from new technologies, from new companies, from new competitors, for a whole host of reasons. Clients seek out public professionals as counselors to help solve problems, to create opportunities, to build market share, to address image problems, and yes, to deal with issues of every sort. Today, I am absolutely convinced that here in India, this will become central to corporate strategy. I can't tell you how many places I've been over the last 20 years as I've traveled around the world. Frankly, I no longer can even count all the different countries I have visited. But today was my first day in India. I can tell you something though. It was humbling and awe-inspiring to recognize that I've only begun to know the nation where there more than one out of every 6 human beings reside. I'm very pleased and honored that you graced me today with the opportunity to address you, and I hope you found this interesting. Thank you.
The talk, because it'll all end up as a tremendous anticlimax. So I will leave it at that, and I will not delay your stand between you and your first cocktail, but I will suggest that in case you have any questions, will you please go ahead.
If you go back some years and you look at Vietnam, the world didn't change. You go back come back a little forward, you see Iraq, the world didn't change. So why is it that September 11th that the world would change? Would you like to elaborate?
Iraq, I look at Vietnam, we look at other horrors that have taken place. And I'll tell you, I think it goes again to what we do for a living. September 11th was the first time that on a global scale, most citizens of the world saw a tragedy take place in their own minds live. Traditionally, what the news media has done is it has showed up after events has taken place, and it has filmed the remnants of the events, and it has filmed the spokesperson trying to explain what actually took place. September 11th, most people in the world for the first time actually saw it live. Might have been tape delayed, might have been time delayed, but they watched the planes fly into the building. And that fundamentally, I believe, changed every way which this world now thinks of itself as a global community. We never had access to information like that. There was never before a time when 95% of the citizens, and that's what the latest data seems to indicate with the world, actually were able to see the video. That is an advent of our satellite capabilities. It is an advent of the internet. It is an advent of the plethora of communication vehicles that now exist. And that is why I believe it has fundamentally changed the way we now think of ourselves as global citizens. I also think it's the advent of the world's big. Today, we all now expect that whenever a major news event takes place, that we'll have access to the same information that people in that very country or city have access to. And consumers in particular, in the polling data that we're doing in Europe, for example, now have a high regard and a high expectation for the ability to get news and information in a way that they have never seen before. That has changed things. And I think that will change the way we conduct our business. I think it will also change the way, frankly, politicians have to deal with the world's issues today. Any other questions? Sir?
You spoke about corporate reputations and brand reputations. And what extent do you believe that? To what extent do you believe that country reputations also need to be projected and established in the same way?
I actually believe the countries do need. I think the United States is a perfect example of a country that has, in its own mind, has a series of values that it does not understand why the rest of the world does not understand. So I believe that, perfect example of a failure in communicating, I guess. Countries today are, to a certain extent, enterprises that are now being judged by the rest. We just named the Beijing Olympics for the Beijing Olympic Sports Committee. All our work was outside of China. But fundamentally, what it was trying to reveal the real China, rather than what people thought China was. The Beijing Olympics Committee went into an unmatched and unparalleled act of transparency. They discussed issues of the environment, issues of the human rights. The government of Beijing basically entered into the threat. It made sure that when we had 50 people around the world basically monitoring activities, providing information about press, where events were taking place, what they should participate in. That is a change, and if China does that, I think every government does that. I cannot presume to, advise the Indian government. I don't know enough. But clearly, India is right now on front and center stage for a lot of issues that are taking place. There is an issue here of being able to explain them beyond to the people in this particular continent. I believe every government is now confronting that issue. The United States Congress just held hearings about why the United States has not been able to talk to Islamic nations in a way that seems to make sense. I think more and more governments are beginning to enter into that equation, that conversation. And I think we as marketing professionals have a lot to offer, and it goes beyond what their foreign ministries can do. So I think it's going to change. Now, does that mean we're going to be hired and retained by governments? No. I don't think bureaucrats fundamentally like people like us. And I don't think foreign ministries necessarily think people like us are really the way they should be communicating. But I would hope that people like us will think about going into public service and helping them navigate through what's going to be very difficult shuttles. Governments will have a problem. They've never had scrutiny like they have today. They need people like us to help them.
The general notion has been that marketing, projecting reputation, projecting brands, has always been projecting what is not. Today, in the last couple of years, decades, issues of corporate ethics have become very strong. Where does reputation management, marketing and brand management, and projecting it in a corporate ethical way come into being, and where does this fine dividing line end or begin?
At Corporate Voice, Weber Shandwick, we actually had a little bit of that discussion at my hotel poolside today. light of Enron, what is the role of a professional advisor? We're the largest investor relations firm in the world. We represent numerous companies. Where do you pull the plug, in essence, with respect to representation as a fair issue? I think the truth of the matter is to serve clients as a public relations practitioner, you have to give them the best advice possible. And the best advice possible in today's world is, I'll go back to my speech, what can be known will be known. And as a corollary to that, short-term never wins over long-term credibility. Too many companies believe in dealing with the press and dealing with difficult issues, that if they can just get by Tuesday, they're okay. Well, the truth is there is a Wednesday, and the press doesn't go away, and the employees who are troubled by the issues don't disappear, and the outside regulators who are watching and worrying about an issue don't stop investigating. Long-term credibility is the key issue, and I think as PR practitioners, as communicators, our job is to advise companies that they have to think of the long term rather than the short term. That is a difficult thing for CEOs to accept. CEOs generally want the problem to go away today. But the reality as a professional, we have to say, what is the long-term impact of not solving it, of not communicating clearly, and of not handling the issue in a way that will give us credibility for the future. And since credibility to me goes into every aspect of trust management, and trust management goes to every aspect of reputation management, in the end, what I tell our folks in our training programs is, if you believe they will not follow your advice, then you have no choice but to end the relationship. Because in the end, it is a worthless relationship. And so, my answer to the question is, with good thought process, you have to be prepared to walk away from a company that fundamentally is not willing to follow advice on how to deal with difficult issues. Because in the end, we're counselors. And a counselor should only be there when its opinion is actually sought. That is most difficult, frankly, for our youngest people, and most understood by our most experienced. Enron has been a debacle of unprecedented. It has raised real issues in the United States with respect to our whole concept of transparency, regulatory issues, and what does the accounting profession and statement mean. It has also raised issues in the public relations and investor relations field, since there were issues raised a year ago with respect to what was, in fact, a good financial filing on Enron's part as to whether or not somebody should have said something a year ago. That is a debate that's going on in our field right now. Sir?
I'll put you on the spot. What
No, that's okay.
advice, Anderson, you have to give them some real quick advice.
Anderson?
Yeah.
Right, and that's a better question actually than I usually get, which is what advice to give to Enron, and sell the stock a hell of a lot earlier. I think Anderson, the issue is how they're handling the process, and candidly, I don't think they're handling it well. I think in a crisis, what you generally have is you have 24 hours to basically, that's what we teach our clients and we teach our staff. You get 24 hours to basically control the dialogue. And if you don't control the dialogue, somebody else is going to be, and that somebody else will not have your interest at heart. So we always advise corporations that in those 24 hours, they have to figure out who's going to speak and what the speech is going to be all about. And they have to basically get on top of the news cycle. The reality is, in Anderson's case, what has also happened is a corollary to that, which is in crises, generally, senior officials of the corporation believe that they have all the information, and it always is worse the next day, because there's always new information that is coming out. Anderson, I believe, has engaged in a very responsive program from day one when their CEO spoke before the United States Congress. But in each time they've tried to say why it's over. Each time they've released information that has tried to say, this is what happened. And each time, a day or two later, it has gotten worse. My advice to them would have been to say it's all under investigation, that they're working with all the investigative bodies, that they will figure out what went wrong afterwards with the investigative bodies, and that they will make sure that their corporation instills a whole new sense of ethics, integrity, rules, and procedures to prevent this from happening. Instead, what has happened for Anderson is every day the press has another gotcha, and therefore it is undercutting their entire strategy of trying to be open and vocal with respect to fixing their problem. So I think they just went down the wrong path. Now, I wasn't there, I'm not an advisor to Anderson, so I don't really know what the specifics are that have dictated this, but that's an outside observation of what's happening to them. Every day there's a gotcha. Yes, sir.
Going back a few years, we were talking about transparency. I think Mr. Kennedy's assassination still is not transparent.
I'm the only one in the United States who believes that Oswald did it. I want you to know, my wife thinks I'm a nut, everybody I know thinks I'm a nut. But remember what I said. I truly believe that everything that can be known will be known. And I know, having been in the government for a while, the ability of the United States government to keep a secret has been something that I just fundamentally cannot accept. So, my belief is he did it, but I will admit that 260 million Americans, I'm sitting there by myself. I just don't believe you can keep a secret. Yes, sir.
How would you rate Praveen Kushwaha as the PR leader today, PR practitioner today?
I think it's terrific. I don't know how else to rate it. Picture last week of him playing squash or racquetball. I think it's terrific. I think he has redefined his country on the world stage. I take nothing away from the substantive actions, but as you asked as a PR practitioner, I think he has done a good job. I think leaders today, actually, I mean, remember what Bill Clinton did, putting aside all the other issues. He, to a certain extent, redefined leadership and how we view leadership. Tony Blair sort of follows the same way. Schroeder, to a certain extent, follows the same way. And I would argue so does Steve. And I would argue also that that's very appealing to a TV generation, to a news media that actually has become younger and looking for that type of openness. I think there's a new leadership sort of paradigm that's taken in Japan also, that is taking place. He fits the characteristics very, very well. That is, I'm not trying to make a political statement here. I'm trying to visit one-on-one to explain what we're doing. But I would say that it was almost similar to Enron, quite candidly. I was involved many years ago in a crisis management situation where I believe the management team truly had done everything right. They had uncovered a significant financial fraud. At that time, it was the largest financial fraud in the history of the United States. There was an accounting firm that actually was involved in that time too. And I could not, and the company could not, ever get ahead of trying to explain that the senior management had not been involved, had done all the things that they were supposed to do. And I saw good people tarred and feathered, and an inability to break through to the press. I think there were two issues there. I think, frankly, first was the press. There is a misimpression about the press, which is that the press is not only supposed to be clear and unbiased, but that the press is also supposed to wait for all the information to come out. In fairness to my friends in the press, the first is absolutely a requirement, and the second is absolutely not. And it is very difficult as a PR practitioner sometimes to recognize that the press's obligation is to report the news as of that day. And we have recognized many times in many difficult circumstances that the news, apropos what I was saying about Anderson a couple of seconds ago, is not necessarily right as of that day. And that becomes a very difficult thing for a PR practitioner in the crisis field. And that was probably the toughest thing I'd ever gone through on behalf of a client.
May I request Mr. Sadegaki for
I got hit by the rice before.
Thank you very much.
We can get up.